Welcome back, everyone. This week we're going to talk about backup plans and adapting, taking a look at the question, how can we plan for things not working correctly in our trainings? Our learning objective today is to prepare some strategies to deal with potential training mishaps. Now, there are lots of different things that might go wrong, but today we're going to talk about technology access, training site issues, tools not working, some possible last-minute time constraints, or what to do if your instructor can't make it. Okay, starting off, some tips for dealing with that lack of technology access. This has happened to me a couple times. There's nothing worse than being in a room full of students or a room full of trainees, and you can't quite pull up your materials, right? You're checking and you don't have access for whatever reason. Maybe the internet went out. Maybe it's the wrong file type. Maybe you can't access your UNR sign-in or your district sign-in, right? All these things can cause issues. Just some tips on how to avoid that. Number one, use supported file formats, things like PowerPoints and PDFs that you can open on most computers. Okay, be careful with the specialty formats because those might not translate well if the computer you're using doesn't have that file format. Okay, so definitely be careful about the file format, making sure that you're either using basic ones or that you know the computer you're going to be presenting on and that it has that format you need. Another tip, have multiple ways to access files. Typically, if I have something on a drive and I'm presenting it and it's an important presentation, I'll email it as well, so I have a secondary way to access it. And additionally, I might have a USB drive. So that way, if they don't have internet access at all, I still have a way to access my files. So definitely a good tip there, especially if it's an important presentation or if there's lots of people attending, that sort of thing. So we talked about carrying that portable drive. Another thing, check on technology ahead of time. Okay, doing that trial run, even if it's 10 minutes before your presentation, can help you spot a lot of headaches and work them out before the presentation starts. So definitely things to do there, right? Use that file format you know will work, or check on things ahead of time. Make sure the format works with the computer. Make sure your files get uploaded appropriately, right? And when all else fails, carry that backup drive. Okay, tips for training site issues. So all sorts of things can happen that compromise kind of that physical space of the training site. Maybe that classroom, the AC went out, so it's not feasible to teach in there. Maybe another training went long. Maybe there was a sports game going on in the location where the training was going to be held, and that went to extra innings or overtime, right? All sorts of things can happen. But if you anticipate there being issues, definitely consider a backup site if there are going to be known issues. If you anticipate anything might happen where you won't have access to that room, consider a backup room, right? And kind of working that out ahead of time. If the issue spur of the moment, consider, can that issue be worked around? Okay, if it's really cold in the room, okay, do we have jackets? Do we have blankets, things we can hand out to continue teaching in this room? Or is it too unbearable that we have to change rooms, right? And then if so, is another site available last minute? Is there another place we can teach this content? Maybe the power went out in a room, right? Is there another spot that we can go to that does have power? And if not, communication is key, right? So communicate not only to all the participants there, but consider leaving a sign on the door, maybe sticking around for a little bit for any latecomers, right? If you have to reschedule, just make sure you're communicating that. Send out an email about the rescheduled training, right? Just make sure that whenever you're rescheduling, that everyone in the room knows kind of the plan there. So communication is key there for sure. Okay, another situation that might come up, sometimes the tools don't work. Whether they are display tools like a projector, maybe instructional tools that the students will be using, like a CPR dummy, or even just technology applications, right? Maybe the technology program that you're demoing isn't quite working, right? What do we do there? Well, here's some tips. When possible, carry a backup tool. Okay, it might not be feasible to carry up a backup projector, depending on what kind of trainings you're doing. Or maybe if you're training massive crowds, it is feasible to have a backup. Or maybe the site has a backup, right? Something like a laser pointer. If you're really gonna use that and implement that into your teaching, maybe you carry a backup laser pointer. In the case of CPR dummies, right? I would definitely have multiple CPR dummies, have extras, so that way if anything happens, right, you can just have a student switch onto another tool, right? So whenever possible, carry those backup tools. Another option, verify things are working ahead of time, right? Checking out your preparation, coming in ahead of time, making sure everything's working correctly. You'll catch a lot of issues that way. Catch a lot of tools not working, and hopefully you have time to troubleshoot them before that training starts. If technology stops working, try to adapt on the fly, right? Maybe you can write something up on the board instead. Maybe you can teach that content in a different kind of way. I used to always think as a teacher, I reserve the right to wing it, right? If all else fails, I can go to the board and we can do projects or problems on the board. We can pass out the individual whiteboards and have students practice that way, right? There's lots of things you can do when the technology doesn't work, as long as the content kind of fits that. And sometimes the content doesn't fit it and you don't have the tool you need. So consider a follow-up training or a follow-up email or follow-up video that you can send out to kind of iron out the details that maybe were missed due to that tool not working during that training. All right, how about last-minute time constraints? Right, depending on the training you're giving, sometimes you have extra time and sometimes you have not enough time, depending on if there are multiple presenters going in a day, right? So think about how you might handle that. If you have less time, obviously, maybe you can cover the material faster, right? You can cover it in a way where you're skipping over maybe the less important details and really trying to stick to the key points. But sometimes if you have less time, you can make it fit. If you're a good presenter, you might be able to cover that in either less time, or sometimes you go into more details, right? And you take up extra time, and that's okay too. But just things to be aware of, depending on, how much time you have, you might adapt your presentation to fit in that allotted time. Another option, if you're given significantly less time, maybe we can chunk that lesson into parts. Hey, I'm going to intro this section today. We'll finish up next class, right? And then you can kind of replan your lesson plans from there. But that's something to consider. Maybe instead of teaching the entire lesson, you just teach it until a certain point, you break it into parts, and then kind of attack it that way. And finally, you might be able to just cover the highlights and send out more information after. Okay, so maybe you just cover the first part and you send out an email discussing the second part, or maybe you cover the key details and you send out the whole presentation, or maybe send out an email write-up detailing the rest, right? So you kind of have some options there. But just some things to think about. We can kind of adapt how long it takes us to present. We can adapt how much we're presenting on. And we can always send out more information after the fact to try to kind of complete that puzzle. Finally, sometimes the instructor can't make it. What can we do? Well, sometimes that instructor can attend digitally, so consider that as an option, right? We live in that Zoom era. Sometimes we can find a substitute. Is there anyone else that can cover the material of that lesson? Sometimes students benefit from the training without the instructor present, right? Maybe they're going through and they're practicing these different aspects of the training and they've already seen the content a little bit, and you can just have them run through that without the instructor is an option. Or finally, sometimes we have to reschedule, and that's okay. as long as that fits the narrative of the training. Like, can we reschedule? Does it have to happen right now? And if so, how can we make it happen? But if we can reschedule, sometimes it's easier to just reschedule. All right, that's all I have for you guys this week. I just wanted to get you guys thinking about backup plans and adapting. And in our knowledge check, that's what you're going to do. So this week, I'd like you to create a backup plan for your training containing the following information. I would like to know, what are the 3 biggest problems that might arise when you're giving your training, right? What do you see going wrong? What issues do you see that might come up? I want to know, how might you deal with these issues if they popped up during the training, right? How would you adapt to these problems? And I would also like you to think of, how might you deal with these issues preemptively, right? How can you come in with a backup plan already set so that you can deal with these issues? Okay, so that's all we have this week. Another discussion style post. You do not have to answer your peers this week. It's just, I just want to know your thoughts. You can share it on that discussion board. Remember, you have office hours Thursday if you have any questions, or feel free to message me. But you guys have a wonderful week.